Welcome to Liberated by Light podcast, where we talk all things addiction.
I'm Gwen.
And I'm Rob. And today we're going to talk about a question that was sent in. The question was, how long does it take to work the 12 steps of addiction recovery? So, in other words, I think what this person was asking was, how long does it take to recover from your addiction? It's a great question. Thank you for asking it. And why don't we just answer it?
Sure, yeah. It's a really great question. There are a lot of nuances to how best to answer it. I understand the question. I understand the desire to know how long will this take. I remember the first time that I was really finally super dedicated to just moving through the 12 steps. I'd been introduced to the 12 steps over a decade earlier and just put it off and put it off and put it off. I would try and fail and try and fail. And I got to a point where I'm just like, okay, no matter what, I'm just going to move through all 12 steps and just get to the other side. And I started the process, and that was very much my mindset of I'm just going to do all 12 and then I will be done. I will finish all 12 and somehow end up on the other side of that miracle. And so there are, like I said, there are a couple nuanced ways to answer it. I will say that what I have discovered by going through this process, finally moving through all 12 steps, I've discovered that there are kind of two phases of these 12 steps, meaning they're kind of broken up into two phases. And I wish I'd understood that in the beginning, because I thought by the time I finished step 12, I have completed the process of recovery and I would be on the other side of recovery. What I didn't understand is that there are two phases. So phase one are kind of steps 1 through 9, kind of a once and done thing. You do these things as you move into addiction recovery. And then the final phase was phase 2, steps 10 and 11 and 12. And those are the maintenance steps that you do every day for the rest of your life. And so
in phase 1, why do you say that's 1 through 9 or 1 and done? Maybe give a little bit more background on that.
Sure, yeah. So, let's see. Yeah, because I'm trying to think of the best way to answer the question. Like I said, I don't want to speak too ambiguously here. I would say that they're one and done because this kind of a jump start into addiction recovery. So I think it's very helpful to understand that addiction is not one thing that sits in the middle of our life. So if you know anybody who's been divorced, or maybe you've been divorced, we've both been divorced, so we understand that divorce isn't like you are in love with somebody and then one day you wake up and you decide, actually not anymore, it's over, we're getting divorced. It is the byproduct of something that accumulates over a long period of time, whatever that is. Even if people get divorced because of one big dramatic event, that event is the product of a lot of little things accumulating over time. And so what we see in divorce, a big dramatic thing, little decisions consistently over a long period of time that created a dynamic where something broke. That is the same way with addiction. Addiction is not one thing that's there and then tomorrow will no longer be there. Addiction is the byproduct of a lot of little things that accumulate over time until now there's an addiction. And so what we learn in addiction recovery is that it's an accumulation of the pain and the resentments and the fears and all of those things, those emotional dysregulations that we hold on to. All of the things we want to control but can't, but feel like maybe we're being controlled by. All of those things. It's an accumulation of those kinds of things over time until the scale tips. And now we're in a place where we just need relief from those pains that we're holding on to and collecting. So we run to our addiction as a place for relief. But the problem with the addiction is that it's also something that sabotages our joy and happiness, and so it also becomes a machine that replicates more pain and produces more of those same things that we were trying to run away from in the first place. So it's this cycle. But if you can understand that addiction is not one big lump of something, it's the accumulation of those things, it's easier to understand that addiction recovery is the process of unraveling those things. Now, some people have an addiction recovery experience where it's very miraculous, like they wake up and that thing is gone. But more commonly, you'll see addiction recovery happening by, the erosion of those things over time. The metaphor that we like to talk about is like a hoarder. If you know someone who's a hoarder, or just imagine you wanted to do an intervention for a hoarder. A house like that, somebody didn't just move in and fill it up like that over time. That is years, a collection that they have accumulated over years, a lifetime sometimes. And so if you were to go in to try to clean that house, you would have to show up with a lot of black plastic bags, a lot of 30-gallon trash bags, rent a dumpster outside and just start digging in and cleaning out the mess, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully this is a once and done thing. So that's what we're looking at when we look at phase 1 and phase 2. And you said, oh, how is that a once and done thing? Well, hopefully when you're going in to do this first stage of the intervention for a hoarder, so hopefully you're not going to have to do this stage again where you go in with those black trash bags and you're filling them up and you're dumping them out. At the end of that process, the house will be clean. So you have achieved phase 1 of your goal of rehabilitating this hoarder's house and this hoarder person.
Yeah, I think as you and I have talked about it in the past, it seems like, so if I had an addiction and I was like, I've done it for 40 years, I've got 40 years of, let's say, garbage or bags of 30-gallon bags that are living inside of my brain. And 1 through 9 seem to be able to go, okay, let's get all of that out. Let's write it down, do whatever, put it down, look at it, go, okay, yeah, that's it. And then you can throw it away. And that's where 1 through 9 help you overcome all of that. And then 10, 11, and 12 are, now that you've taken that 40 years and just tossed it away through doing the right process. Obviously, it's not as easy as what I'm making it sound like, but that one and done thing should cover all of that 40 years. And then what you're talking about is 10, 11, and 12 would be from the day that you tossed all of your 40 years of garbage away. Now, starting brand new, fresh, moving forward, you can just go, okay, I'll take it one day at a time, one day at a time, one day at a time. And that's where you live with 10, 11, and 12 kind of, right? Is that how?
Yeah.
Is that too oversimplified or?
No, there are a couple changes I'll make to the way that you said it. I love what you said because yes. So phase 1 is you go in with those black trash bags and you do that deep cleaning, and that's what steps 1 through 9 are of the 12 steps. Steps 10 and 11 and 12, like you said, beautifully put, yes, that's going to be the maintenance phase where now, the hoarder is the one who has to go back and live in that house. The house has been cleaned, but it's the same person who's going back in. The same person who had those inclinations or the habits that led to them accumulating all that garbage in the first place. It's that same person who's going to go back and live in that house. So now, in order for that person to keep a clean house, they now have to practice the skill of daily pickup to maintain a clean house. And that's step 10 and 11 and 12. But now to put it back in the framework, so you mentioned, you said if you had 40 years of addiction, that you're going in and cleaning it out. And I would just make a tweak to what you said there because it's not 40 years of addiction. If you look at a hoarder's house, it has not always looked like a hoarder's house. The mess started to accumulate with, an extra trash bag here, extra dishes in the sink here, maybe one too many cats. And at that point, somebody would not have come in and said you're a hoarder. So similarly, when we start to collect this pain in our life and that sense of control or trauma or whatever, someone won't come in and say you're an addict. That happens at a very specific point in the process. A hoarder's house looks like a hoarder's house after it's been accumulating garbage for quite some time. An addict, you wouldn't come in and say you're an addict. You would come in and say maybe that's someone who has pain. But once they start to deal with that pain in a specific way, routinely, cyclically, okay, now you can look at that person and say you're an addict. But what it's important to understand, even in the case of a hoarder, because that's the metaphor I'm using here, and an addict, is what you first need to understand is that isn't first a hoarder. It started with the accumulation of things they couldn't let go of. Physically, we see that as a physical manifestation in their house, right? An addict is just somebody who started with an accumulation of pain that they didn't know how to let go of. And at some point it tipped and now we're an addict because we're just trying to find relief from that pain. So when we're going in and cleaning out the garbage, we're not saying we're going in and cleaning out the effects and the garbage of our addiction. It's a different perspective. We're going in and we're cleaning out the pain and the resentments and the fears, all of these things that we've been holding on to and accumulating, because those are the things we run from when we're going into our addiction. I didn't get to be over 300 pounds because Oreos were that good. I got to be over 300 pounds because my collection of pain was that horrible that I ran from it so fast over and over and over to the binging and the other things that were part of my addiction. And so what we do is we're cleaning out the pain that we hold on to that we are running from. That's what we do in phase 1 through 9. And then in steps 1 through 9. And then phase 2, steps 10 and 11 and 12. What we're doing is we're not trying to navigate at that point. We're not trying to say, what do we do to stay safe from our addiction? No, because it's not about our addiction. What we're doing is what do we do to stay safe from the pain that first moved us into our addiction? So it should be if you come at it with a perspective of understanding that this is a process of fighting your way back to joy and peace and happiness over and over, it helps to adjust our perspective. And so I hope that makes sense, because what we're doing in 10 and 11 and 12, it isn't a fear-based, what do I do to stay free of my addiction? It's, whew, I woke up feeling good and happy today. What are the strategies and the techniques and the tools I have to use to make sure I stay there? Because you're going to walk through your day on a daily basis. I mean, I'm on the other side of my addiction, well on the other side, but still, I run into things that cause me pain and confusion and uncertainty and fear all the time, because I'm a human living in a world run by crappy humans, and I'm one of them. So I'm like, those will always be a part of my life. And so now I have to still practice those principles of how to make sure I can guard my happiness, peace, joy, and serenity, and at least know my way back to it.
So when you're on the other side, what can help you get through it faster? Or is there a way to make it go faster?
Right, good question. Because again, your question is, how long does it take? So we'll come specifically back to that. But things that can make it go faster, I think the other part of that is what might make it take longer. Because really, when you look at steps 1 through 9, I hope it's okay if I go back to that specific question, because that should answer what you're saying in terms of to help it go faster. Definitely, I think the thing that helps to go faster, first and foremost for me, was not trying to give up my addiction at the same time that I was trying to go through the steps. I was functioning under the misunderstanding for a very, very long time that I had to give up my addiction in order to successfully go through the steps. As long as I tied my success with what I was doing over here with my addiction to my understanding of how successful I was at the steps, I just was in this cycle of trying and failing and trying and failing and trying and failing.
And would that be where white knuckling comes into the play?
Oh, yeah.
Because if you're worried about recovering, but you're also worried that you have to give up your addiction, and that's not what your mind is willing to let go, then you're going, okay, I'm going to white knuckle it. I hope I can do this. I hope I can stop doing my addiction this time. And then you fail. And you're like, okay, crap. So I got to white knuckle again.
Hold this pose. Let me look at how much energy that's taking, though. When you're white knuckling, I mean, physically you can see the amount of energy it's taking you just to hold that energy. Yeah. That's energy that you could be spending on chasing joy. Trying to course correct back into a place of peace and happiness. And so for me, it is a waste of time and it is a waste of energy to do that.
But if you're also doing this, you're focusing on the addiction itself. So if I'm white knuckling, I'm going, where's my mind at? It's focused directly on my addiction.
Yeah.
And so if you're focusing on your addiction, you're not focusing on joy, you're not focusing on recovery, you're focusing on how do I white knuckle my way through the pain that I'm feeling inside and trying to overcome that pain and get on the other side, but you're so focused on what is in front of you that you can't get around it.
Yeah. And who wants to hold that position one more time? Who wants to be in a hurry to live like this? Nobody. You know what I mean? And every time I hit rock bottom, I was like, well, that is better than rock bottom, so let me go to it. Let me go back and try to white knuckle my way through this forever. I thought that was the best that the 12 steps had to offer. I thought that was the best that God could offer me, was the ability and willingness to do that for the rest of my life. I would be willing and able to white knuckle my way through the pain in my chest for the rest of my life. And so I wasn't in a hurry to get there. Now, at one point I hit rock bottom hard enough that I was like, I'll do it. I mean, it's better than this. But then getting into the addiction recovery, you forget. You forget how hard rock bottom is. And so then you go back into this place of white knuckling, and that sucks. That hurts. That's uncomfortable. And what do addicts do to cope with pain and discomfort? They go to their addiction because they know it will give them relief. And so for me, hitting rock bottom has always been enough to scare me enough to go back to try to white knuckle and do that horrible, awful suffering. Hate white knuckling. But it was never enough to keep me there, because white knuckling was never good enough to make me forget how good my addiction felt when I needed relief. And white knuckling put me in a place where I needed relief.
Well, white knuckling will never be good enough because you're focused on the wrong thing. You're not focused on joy. You're not focused on the joy that can come from overcoming your addiction. Yeah. You're focused on the addiction itself. If it's overeating or hoarding or whatever, you're focused on that so much that it's causing the pain. So you're triggering yourself. So you're just going to be going in this internal loop and cycle just over and over and over and over again, day after day.
Right, because what you're doing is, if you think that's the best that recovery can offer you, you will always be locked in this misunderstanding that the two ends of the spectrum are the horrible pain of your addiction and what it's causing in your life, or the horrible discomfort of white knuckling. And when you're looking at those two, then you could be like, well, the addiction is worse. What it's doing to me and my loved ones is obviously worse, so I better just trade it out for this. I guess I'm so selfish that I can't do this. I guess, I'm not strong enough to do this or whatever. And for me, I was in that cycle of, for over a decade of feeling like I was too weak, too broken, too lazy, too selfish to not move just into the suffering of white knuckling for the benefit of my life, my health, my children, my family. But when you're looking at it as choosing between two hards, that's kind of impossible arithmetic. It wasn't until I realized that it's not about the addiction at all. The addiction sends me into pain. White knuckling also sends me into pain. And now I'm just looking for relief, which my addiction helps with. What I had to find was it isn't my addiction versus my willingness. What it is the pain I hold versus this over here, which is happiness and joy, which isn't defined by whether I am or am not holding on to an addiction. It's pain, which, by the way, addiction comes into the equation, but it's pain first. It's pain versus joy. And when we go through the 12 steps in the appropriate way and to discover our higher power and allow him to make us feel better in real time, then we realize what joy is available to us. And I know I say this a lot, but anybody who does not experience joy or peace on a daily basis, they are living below their privilege. Even an addict, if you're not experiencing joy and peace on a daily basis, you're living below your privilege. And so for me, when you said what's something that can make it go faster, I will tell you the thing that made it go fastest for me, and on the other side of the thing that made it go so slow for me over a decade, is the dichotomy, or at least that place of, am I doing these steps while trying to wrestle my addiction? That's what you did, that white knuckling thing, that takes so much energy, mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. That takes so much energy. And so if you're putting all of your energy into that, when you're trying to move through addiction recovery, you're not going to have the energy to really move more into the how are you experiencing peace and joy on a daily basis. So for me, I didn't do it on purpose. I did not mean to not give up my addiction while I did the steps, because I didn't understand these things in the beginning. It's on this side, because there was nobody to explain it to me this way. I wish I had. And now hopefully I can give it to someone else, but I didn't know what the true fight was over. I was never successful in giving up my addiction, so I had no choice but to either give up again or just keep doing the steps anyway.
So what you're kind of saying to them is, even if you have a bag of Oreos in your hand,
Yeah.
and you're still working the steps, it's still working.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Because the steps and what you're doing with your addiction, totally two different things. Totally two different things. I used to think, and then we did a whole video on this, 2 Lies of Addiction Recovery. I used to think that in order to successfully work the steps, I had to give up my addiction first. I had to wrestle it. I had to put it in a box and build a dam so that I could have the energy necessary to do the steps. I thought that was the case, and so I tried and failed and tried and failed and tried and failed. But then it got to a point where I'm like, okay, the dam is broken. I don't even have the energy to build the dam. Like, I don't even care, like, whatever. But I'm just going to keep doing these steps. And as I did that, so both of them in real time and literally just spending all my energy on the step work, I discovered that instead of white knuckling my addiction so I could successfully do the steps, as I did the steps, the addiction went away. Because as I did the steps and focused only on that part of the process, not measuring it or gauging it or defining it by what was happening with my addiction over here, as I just did the steps and followed them, and all of them really are designed to help to create a more intimate connection between you and your higher power, and to use your higher power on a daily basis to feel better. And as I did that, I found, whoa, I do feel better. Like, when I'm in pain, I'm running to my addiction for relief to feel better. But when I was doing side by side, my addiction and that God thing, I called it, when I did that, I'm like, oh, the God thing works better. It works better. It works faster, and it lasts way longer with no side effects. I mean, my addiction worked well, but it took. Like, I would go to it for power, and I got that power, but then it took so much from me. Mm. When I used God, when I used my higher power, I would find relief better, faster, and it lasted longer, and it took nothing. It just gave. And so because as an addict, I'm looking for the thing that gives me relief. I'm looking for the better drug. God was a better drug. So it was easy to bypass my addiction and choose him instead.
Are there things that helped you to get there? Anything that you can one or two things you could specifically share with our audience to say what would help them get to recovery?
Yeah. First, just focus on doing the steps and understand, we could do a whole podcast about this, understand that it is a process first and foremost between you and your higher power. This is an intimate, warm space that you're sharing with you and your higher power. Make your way to God. God will know what to do with you. That's all the 12 steps are. It's just a way to move you closer into that relationship so you can hear him better and do what he's asking in all areas of your life. And as you do that, yeah, the addiction will be taken care of. And I promise you, that's not going to be the most beautiful thing that happens. It's not. It's not going to be the most significant thing. It feels like it right now because when you're in your addiction, everything feels like it's on fire and you know where the match is. Your addiction is the match that's torching everything you love. But if you were on the other side of that fire, you would remember there's a whole other life waiting for you. And so once that fire is out, you can move on and live that whole other life. And as much as you recognize that you need God's power right now to put out that fire, he's very excited about walking with you in the rest of your life to create something so beautiful. So recognizing that I think is so helpful, is knowing this is first and foremost a program of joy and how to feel it. Because if you understand that, then you will recognize your ability to have success today. Between breakfast and lunchtime, you can recognize the success of the program because immediately from the beginning, there are processes and strategies given to you to know how to feel better today. Even if the addiction is raging in your life, you can still find those specks of joy. And as you see what you are able to do, as you see the cause and effect outside of the addiction, that's over there. That's just a reflection of what's happening between you and God. As you start to move through those practices of cause and effect, I did this and I felt better, you know that the program is successful and keep at it. If you measure it by, I still have my addiction, yeah, the program looks like it sucks and it's ineffective because 5 seconds later you still had your addiction. But if you measure it by, was I able to feel joy today? More joy, more peace, have more perspective, feel the presence of my higher power? Yes, the program's working. Keep doing it and lean into that. And then eventually the addiction will unravel itself.
It seems like as you work the steps, so if you eat a whole bag of Oreos for reference at the beginning, and then you get another bag of Oreos and you only eat 3/4 of it, and then you get another bag of Oreos, and the next month you eat only half of it. It seems like incrementally you're getting better. So the more you work the steps, the less Oreos you're eating. Just for reference, it just little by little over time, whether it's weeks or months or days, whatever it is for you, it will slowly, even though you're in your addiction, as you work the steps, your addiction will get less and less and less and less and less, and you'll turn to it less. Yeah. You won't rely on it anymore, or you'll rely on it less as you work the steps.
Yeah, because you'll absolutely have no use for it anymore. You'll have zero use for it. And I want to say that you won't eat less or smoke less or whatever the addiction is. You won't whatever it is less because you are struggling to. It's not like when you do 5 push-ups today, but next week you can do 7, and then the next day you can do 10. Or 100 in your case. It's not like that. It's not like you're trying harder and harder and look at you being better and better. It's not like that. You'll see it as a direct reflection of what's happening with you and the God thing. So you won't eat less or addiction less because you're winning that struggle. You will do it less because you don't feel like doing it as much. You don't feel like it. And that to me was the most
God or your higher powers coming into your life and filling it. You're filling you with joy instead of making you turn towards your addiction.
Yeah. So for me, which I think is so cool, is like I don't binge anymore. Like I'm not in my addiction anymore. But it's not because I won some battle over food. It's because I don't feel like it. I moved through my addiction the way that I did. I got to be over 300 pounds eating whatever, whenever, however I wanted.
2 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock at night.
It didn't matter. Tub of ice cream at 3 a.m. Whatever I had to do to feel the way I wanted to feel. And now I've lost over 120 pounds eating whatever, whenever, however I wanted. So to me, that thing in between, that miracle in between was not Gwen learning how to keep her mouth shut. The miracle in between was something that changed the how, the what, and the when I wanted to eat.
So that guess leads us into, how did you know that you were recovered? What would have given you a tip off of, now I'm on the other side of my addiction?
That's such a good question. And again, I wish I'd had someone to explain this to me in the beginning, to understand that this is a journey of happiness and joy and feeling better. And I wish I would have known, because then I could have seen evidence of that from day one and known that I was on the right path. The way that I knew, though, even within the dysfunctional framework I was working in, was, I will say that slowly over time, I thought I was recovered at different points, and then just got better and better. For me, it was like a slow dawning of light of morning. You know, the sun's coming up, and that when the sun first peaks, you're like, oh, it's morning. I made it to morning. And then it gets gradually brighter and brighter and brighter. And I had a lot of moments like that, because I did stop feeling like my addiction in different ways at different times, and that we could do a whole nother episode on that. But the moment that I was like, I made it, I remember I was in a place where things had really been starting to get dialed in for me for a few months, and like consistently, because I had gone through a period of, like, I call it rapid cycles, where it was like I was in my addiction, and then somehow I'd have a reset, and I had food neutrality for a few days, and then I would start feeling like, I did it. Look at me be awesome. Like, I don't even want a donut. I'm so awesome. I'm going to tell my family. I'm going to tell my friends. I'm going to tell my sponsor. And everybody's going to be like, look at Gwen being so awesome. And as soon as I would start to feel like that, it would trip me up. And I'd be back in the food for a few days, and then I'd have a reset, and that was happening and happening. And then I realized, like, oh, as soon as I'm giving myself the credit instead of God, it's tripping me up. And so I tried to be more humble and in that space of just appreciating what was happening as it was happening. But then I remember it just was over. And it wasn't like I woke up one day and it was a miracle. We can talk about that another time, because I have had that experience. I've like miraculously lifted. But at this point, I kind of moved and grown myself into this place of recovery with the accumulation, just like the addiction comes with the accumulation of lots of pain over time. Here I was, it was the accumulation of these little joys over time, until like that was my consistent state, and I wasn't hungry the way I used to be. But I remember feeling like I could just eat 3 meals and 2 snacks a day, and would actually just be fine with that, without a rigid rule, but just like, yeah, I'm not really that hungry. And I'm like, this is cool. Like, maybe I'm recovered. I don't know. Let me give it a couple weeks and see how I feel. Because I had been in a place of like cycles. And then a couple weeks went by, I'm like, no, I'm feeling good. I've got ice cream in my freezer I don't care about. That's cool. Let me just give it a couple more weeks before I call myself recovered and tell people I can sponsor. And I did that, and then after like a month or 6 weeks, it stuck. And I was like, I'm on the other side of recovery, I'm pretty sure. So now I'm ready to sponsor. And I will just say there's been lots of phases like that. Yeah, where just like, I'm pretty sure I'm in recovery. And now collectively looking back, it's like I can't pinpoint to a time, because the light just came and came and came. But I think it would have been different if I'd understood in the beginning what I was looking for. That I wasn't looking for my addiction to be gone. I was looking for the presence of joy, of a solution to pain. And then I could have chased that and used my energy to do that instead of that.
White knuckling.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think with the last few minutes that we have remaining with our on the podcast, how do you make sure that you stay recovered? So you've worked hard, you've overcome. How do you stay recovered?
I love that question. Again, we could do a whole episode
Yeah.
on that. So those maintenance steps, 10 and 11 and 12, what they are, again, we're calling them steps. Maybe your eyes are glossing over because you have no idea what I'm talking about. But what it is, as you move through this process of learning how to find and feel and maintain joy by using your higher power, first of all, it is delicious. It is so amazing and beautiful. Don't define it by whether or not your addiction is in your life. Define it by if God is in your life and how does it feel, because that's going to suck you in so hard on the other side. You literally will have no use for your addiction. I don't fight for my recovery every day. I'm not fighting my maintenance. I don't believe in one day at a time crap. Like, no, this life is so good. I can't imagine ever going back to my addiction at all. It is so counterfeit to what I'm living. So what 10 and 11 and 12 are, just very, very quickly, is 10. Well, I don't even use the names. I hate the names. Basically what you're doing is you learn how to have these conversations with God, where if you were on the side of the road with a flat tire, you would call your bestie and be like, girlfriend, come help me out with this tire. That's going to be a short, succinct conversation where they're going to come and do a very specific thing to save you. But then you also, that best friend is also the person you're going to call on a Friday night to be like, oh, let me tell you, let's make plans, let's do things. If you can learn how to have both of those kinds of conversations with God, the ones that allow you to build a steady relationship and to feel the way he is casually on a Friday night, but also learn to rely on him to, be the one that you call when you're in a place of desperation, of pain, and be like, God, like, I'm hurting, can you help me here? You will balance the relationship out with your higher power in a way that you feel good in the space of that relationship outside of the addiction, totally addiction outside of it. You know what I mean? But you will be able to live your life in your happiest moments with your higher power as part of the conversation, knowing that he is feeding into that happiness and joy and helping you create that place that you want to live in. And then also in the moments where you're dysregulated, you will know who to call right away for the best relief, the best response time. There is not a better anything or anyone who has a better response time than God. And once you find that sweet spot, like, it is easy to live there because it feels good.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. Thank you for sending in the question. Hopefully, this podcast helps and helps you understand or answer your question, but also understand the process that you can go through. We enjoy spending this time with you, and keep your questions coming in. And remember, you're only one prayer, one miracle away. Thanks.